The wind howled through the Wyoming territory like a lost soul searching for a place to rest. In 1885, Sarah Winslow stood alone on the frozen train platform, her breath visible in the cold air, her fingers numb and stiff. She had already lost so much, the silver mine back east that collapsed, burying her dreams beneath stone and debt. The last of her money had bought her a one-way ticket west, and now she was stranded in Lamb with nothing but a small trunk and the sharp sting of loneliness. The people at the station hardly looked at her, each minding their own business, their heads lowered against the biting wind. But then there was Caleb Vance. Ragged Caleb, they called him, a man who had no place in town, not even in the saloon. He lived in the mountains, far away from the bustling streets, and came down only twice a year to trade furs for salt and iron. To the people of Lamb, he was a ghost of sorts, a man with no wealth, no social standing, just a rough, wild man from the hills. But Sarah saw something else in him. His eyes, calm and deep, spoke of survival, of a life lived through hardship, and yet they weren't cruel. They weren't like the eyes of the men who had tried to take advantage of her when she was back east. There was something steady in Caleb's gaze, something that drew her in, like the stillness of a mountain lake at dawn. The train whistle screamed as it pulled away, leaving her behind. The sky above was heavy, dark, with the promise of a brutal winter. Sarah felt a weight settle in her chest. Alone. Once again. The marshal had made it clear. She couldn't stay in the boarding house without a husband or a job. The town had nothing left for her, and returning east meant facing shame and hunger. Her choices were few, but there was Caleb, standing at the edge of the platform, waiting for her decision. He was a poor man by all accounts, the poorest man in Lamb, but when Caleb spoke, his voice was calm, strong, as if he was used to the hardships of the land. "I have a cabin," he said quietly. "It's far, and the walk is hard, but you'll be safe there. You'll be respected." Quote, Sarah's thin shoes seemed to shrink under her gaze, but her eyes followed Caleb's hand as he gestured toward the distant mountains, where the jagged peaks of the Wind River Range rose like guardians of a world few dared to enter. She knew nothing about these mountains, nothing except that they were vast, cold, and unforgiving. Yet, something in Caleb's words made her feel a strange pull, a hope she hadn't known for so long. With a trembling hand, she reached out and took his. The circuit judge performed the ceremony with no fanfare, no flowers, no music. Just a man, a woman, and the quiet understanding that survival, in this wild land, sometimes meant becoming something else, something bound by law, but not by heart. After the ceremony, Caleb lifted Sarah's heavy trunk, as if it weighed nothing, his shoulders broad and sure. He didn't turn toward the road that led back to town. Instead, he pointed to the mountains, to the high ridge where the path grew narrow and treacherous. "The path is hard," he said softly. "Follow my tracks. Do not look back." Quote, as they left the town behind, the last lights of Lamb disappeared into the dusk. The cold crept in, but Sarah felt no fear. She was walking with him now, the man they called Ragged Caleb, the man who would lead her into the unknown. The path was dark, and the forest around them swallowed them whole, but Caleb moved through it with an ease that surprised her. His boots made no sound on the frozen ground. He listened to the mountain, his senses attuned to every subtle shift in the wind, every rustle of branches. The silence was profound. It was not the quiet of a church or a room of sleeping children, but a silence born of nature itself, vast and endless. Caleb led her higher, deeper into the wilderness. Every step took them further from the world she had known, and Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. What had she done? What kind of life had she just chosen? Yet in Caleb's presence, she didn't feel afraid. There was something about him, something beyond his rough exterior, that made her believe she would be safe. After a long while, Caleb stopped beside a frozen stream. He broke the ice with his boot and filled a wooden cup. "Drink," he said. "The air steals strength if you do not." Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then took the cup, her fingers brushing his rough skin as she drank. His hands were scarred, hard, but careful as he watched her. She could feel the strength in him, the years of surviving the unforgiving mountain. He belonged here. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt as though she might belong too. They continued up the mountain, the path growing steeper, more dangerous. Caleb never faltered. He knew these mountains. He knew how to survive in them. And as the day turned to night, he led her to a place where they would rest, beneath a rock overhang, sheltered from the worst of the cold. Caleb built a fire quickly, the crackling flames a stark contrast to the stillness of the world around them. As Sarah sat by the fire, she realized that the man she had married wasn't just a poor mountain man. There was more to Caleb Vance, more than anyone in Lamb could understand. What did he know about the mountains? What secrets did he hold? And why, of all people, had he chosen her? The fire flickered and crackled, casting strange shadows across Caleb's face. His eyes, calm as ever, never left the flames. Sarah could feel the weight of the night pressing down, but somehow, in his presence, the fear she had carried for so long began to fade. She had married the town's poorest man, but perhaps, in the end, he would lead her to something greater than she ever expected. The mountain did not soften with the dawn. When Sarah woke, the air was biting, and the world around them was wrapped in a blanket of deep snow. Caleb was already awake, checking the fire, his eyes scanning the peaks that rose above them like silent sentinels. The wind still howled, and the cold pressed in from all sides, but Caleb seemed unfazed, his every movement sure, confident. It was as though he belonged here, and perhaps, for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she might too. "Time to move," Caleb said, his voice steady. "The pass is close. We must reach it before the storm grows worse." Quote. Sarah rose, her muscles stiff from the cold, and followed him as he gathered his things. The world around them had changed overnight. The snow covered the ground like a thick white sheet, and the once familiar trees were now ghostly silhouettes in the fog of the early morning. But Caleb moved with purpose, his footsteps cutting through the snow like a man who had walked this path 1,000 times before. They climbed higher, the terrain becoming steeper, the air thinner with each step. Sarah struggled to keep up, her lungs burning, but Caleb never stopped. He walked with ease, his pace steady, never faltering. It was as though the mountain itself was part of him, and he was guiding her through its heart. As they neared the top, Sarah felt the change in the air. The wind shifted, carrying with it the sharp scent of snow and ice. The temperature dropped, and the snow began to fall harder, swirling around them like an angry beast. Caleb stopped for a moment, turning to Sarah. His face was shadowed by his thick beard, but his eyes were steady. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. "The wind is coming. It will try to take you off the path. Trust me." Sarah nodded, feeling a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. She trusted him. There was something in his calm presence that made her believe she would survive this, no matter what the mountain threw at them. She followed Caleb closely, her breath shallow, her body trembling from the cold, but she kept moving, one step at a time. The climb grew harder, the path narrowing with each twist and turn. The rocks beneath their feet became slick, the footing uncertain. Sarah slipped once, twice, but Caleb was always there to steady her, his hand firm on her arm, guiding her through the treacherous landscape. They were close now. She could see the narrow pass ahead, a break in the mountain, a glimmer of hope in the white wilderness. But just as they reached the final stretch, disaster struck. Sarah's foot slipped on a patch of ice, and she went tumbling down the slope, her body rolling out of control. She cried out in panic as she slid toward the edge of a sharp drop, her heart pounding in her chest. Before she could fall, Caleb's strong hands reached out, grabbing her by the coat and yanking her back. He pulled her close, holding her tightly against his chest as the snow swirled around them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Sarah's heart raced as she clung to him, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "You're safe," Caleb whispered, his voice steady as always, but Sarah could feel the tension in his grip. He hadn't let go of her since the moment he caught her. She wasn't sure if it was for her sake or his own. Caleb pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made Sarah's chest tighten. He didn't speak for a long while, as if weighing something heavy in his mind. Finally, he shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I told you," he said softly, "this mountain doesn't forgive mistakes. But you're here. You made it. We made it." Sarah looked around at the sheer drop beneath them, the snow falling like a curtain around them. For the first time, she realized just how close they had come to disaster. The mountain was a cruel, unforgiving place, and they had made it through only by Caleb's skill and strength. They stood there for a moment, both catching their breath, before Caleb turned and nodded toward the pass. "We're almost there," he said. The last stretch was a narrow ridge, the rocks sharp and jagged. The wind howled with fury, the snow biting at their faces, but Caleb led the way, his steps sure and steady. Sarah followed, determined not to let the fear take hold of her again. She wasn't the same woman who had stepped off the train in Lamb. She was stronger now. She had Caleb's quiet strength to guide her. When they finally reached the pass, the storm began to ease, the wind died down, and the snow lightened. Sarah looked around, her eyes wide with disbelief. The mountains stretched on for miles, but ahead of them lay a hidden valley, a place untouched by the harshness of the world below. The air was warmer here, the snow softer. It was as though they had crossed into a different world entirely, one where the mountain protected them, rather than tried to destroy them. Caleb stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the valley below. "This is where the mountain speaks," he said softly, almost reverently. "This is where I've built my home." Quote. Sarah looked down at the valley below, her breath catching in her throat. It was green, alive with life. Steam rose from clear pools of water, and the earth seemed to hum with warmth. She had never seen anything like it. This, she realized, was Caleb's secret. The man the town called Ragged Caleb had hidden a kingdom in the mountains, and she was standing in it now. Caleb turned to her, his face softening. "This is where I've lived. It's a place untouched by the world below, a place where the storm cannot reach." Sarah took a deep breath, the weight of it all settling in her chest. She had come to the mountains, searching for survival, for a way to escape the world that had left her broken. But now, standing at the edge of the valley, she understood that she had found something more. She had found a future. Caleb had brought her here not just to survive, but to build something new. Together. The valley below them was like a dream, a place untouched by the hardships of the world outside. Sarah could hardly believe it was real. The wind had calmed, and the snow now fell gently, as though the mountain itself had decided to let them rest. Caleb stood by her side, his hand on her shoulder, as they looked down into the hidden world he had carved out of the land. For the first time since she'd left the East, Sarah felt warmth that wasn't just from the fire. It was a warmth that seeped deep into her bones, filling a hollow space inside her she hadn't even realized was there. She wasn't just surviving now, she was living. The hidden valley stretched out before them, green and vibrant, with clear streams and the promise of new life. It was as though the mountain had opened up a sanctuary, a place where time moved slowly, untouched by the harshness of the world below. The air was warm here, thick with the scent of pine and earth. Every breath felt like a gift. Caleb led Sarah down into the valley, his footsteps sure and steady. The path was rocky at first, but as they moved further in, the ground softened, the earth alive beneath their feet. Caleb pointed to the garden beds fed by the warm spring water that ran through the valley. "These will keep us through the winter," he said quietly. "But they need care. Plants, animals, life." Sarah watched him work, his hands moving with quiet precision. She had never seen someone so at home in the world, so attuned to the land. She thought of the man he had once been, the architect from New York, a man of wealth and status, and how that life had crumbled around him. He had come west not to escape, but to rebuild, to learn the rhythm of the earth and the sky. And in this place the mountain had accepted him. But now, as she watched him tending to the land, she realized that Caleb wasn't just building a home. He was building a life, a future, not just for himself, but for both of them. The days that followed were filled with learning. Caleb showed Sarah how to harvest winter greens, how to dry roots for storage, and how to read the subtle signs of the weather that never reached the valley floor. They worked together, side by side, building something that felt like it could last forever. As Sarah worked, she realized that she had never felt more at peace. She had come to the mountains searching for a way out, but she had found something far greater. She had found a place where she could breathe again, where the weight of the past no longer pressed down on her. And more than that, she had found Caleb. In the quiet of the evenings, they would sit by the fire, the warmth of the hearth wrapping around them like a blanket. Caleb would read from his journals, sharing the thoughts and dreams he had kept hidden for so long. Sarah listened, her heart softening with every word, with every shared moment. And in return, she told him stories from her past, of the world she had left behind. One night, as the fire crackled between them, Sarah asked the question that had been on her mind since they first arrived in the valley. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked softly. "Why me?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. Sarah waited, the question hanging between them, until finally he spoke. "I brought you here because the mountain gave me a second chance," he said quietly. "It gave me a place to rebuild, to heal, but it was always going to be empty without someone to share it with." Sarah's heart swelled in her chest as she looked at him. She had come to the mountain with nothing but fear and grief, but now she saw something different in Caleb's eyes. Hope. The same hope that had brought him to the valley all those years ago. And she knew in that moment that she was no longer just a woman who had been lost and broken. She was part of something greater now. She was part of this mountain, this life they were building together. The winter passed slowly, but with it came a new rhythm, one that Sarah had never known before. The snow melted, the flowers bloomed, and the valley came to life. The garden flourished, the streams flowed freely, and the house that Caleb had built grew as well. Together, they expanded it, adding rooms, windows that opened to the morning sun. They worked together, day by day, building not just a home, but a life. And as the years passed, the town of Lamb below remained unaware of the secret kingdom that Caleb had hidden above the clouds. The rumors of steam rising from the impossible heights never led anyone to the valley. The mountain kept its secret safe, and Caleb and Sarah kept their peace. One clear morning, Sarah stood on the ridge above the house, looking out over the peaks. She thought of the woman who had stood on that train platform, trembling with fear, believing she had married the poorest man in the West. She smiled as Caleb joined her, slipping his hand into hers. "They think we vanished," she said softly. Caleb smiled, his eyes bright with the quiet strength that had always been there. "Let them," he said. "We found what we needed." Quote, and with that, they walked back down into the valley, their lives entwined in a place that belonged only to them. A place where the wind no longer howled, but whispered softly in the trees. A place where, in the quiet of the mountains, two lives had found each other and built something that the world below could never take away.